The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning on our second webinar of the series from the Regional Catastrophic Planning Team. We'll just give it a few more seconds to get the final attendees that are logging in at the moment on board, and then we'll start our webinar in just a few seconds. Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is Roy Tiley with BCS Incorporated. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'd like to begin by giving a brief overview of the webinar process for today. The webinar will run from 10 till noon today. We have 8 panelists with us this morning from the federal, state, and local governments who will be sharing their thoughts and points of views on the priorities and expectations from industry during emergency events. Only our panel members will have the ability to speak during the webinar. All those listening will not have the ability to speak. However, we have arranged 2 methods for those listening to participate. First, we'll be asking a polling question to our listeners and ask them to participate by responding to the question. The results will be captured in real time, and our panelists will have the opportunity to respond to the results during the webinar. Second, on the GoToWebinar panel that appears on the right of your screen, there's an area labeled Questions. Here, audience can type in and submit questions that they'd like to pose to the panel members to our moderator team here. At the end of the webinar, time permitting, we'll direct some of those questions to panel members and give them an opportunity to respond. So this webinar series is led by Sherry Black and Laura Stockstill of the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania Regional Catastrophic Planning Team. This is a joint project with the state, local, tribal, and territorial government coordinating council, the Edison Electric Institute, the Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program, and the All Hazards Consortium. At this point, I'd like to ask Dennis Schrader, from a regional advisor with the All Hazards Consortium, to provide our formal welcome and provide an overview presentation to help set the stage for our panel discussion. Dennis?
Thanks, Roy. It's a pleasure to be with everybody this morning. And just let me start by saying that the key takeaways that I'd like to make sure that we have here coming out of this discussion is how do we sustain private sector power resilience through exercises and really focus on power as the key infrastructure that speeds restoration of all the others. And I'll mention a little bit about the exercises later in the presentation. If I could get the next slide, that would be great.
Dennis, you should have control of the slides. You should be able to move them forward yourself.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, good. Thank you. So let me just start by the objectives, and these are very similar to the objectives in the first webinar, is that we want to better understand energy interdependencies, especially with the key lifelines like energy and water, and we want to really dig into operational solutions. It's one thing to identify them and create awareness, but it really requires a detailed operational conversation to be able to drill into what does it take to reduce the overall timeline for restoration. And again, we're having a little difficulty. There we go. Thank you. Now, in terms of energy impacts, we have a quote here from former Assistant Secretary David Sandelow, and basically, what he's getting at is that the importance of energy and electricity plays in everybody's lives, and until we don't have it, we lose sight of the fact that simple things like businesses being able to operate elevators and hospitals, pipelines, even something as simple as going to a gas station and pumping gasoline becomes difficult if you don't have power. So I think there's a growing understanding of the importance of power. In addition to that, if I can get to the next slide, these interdependencies, this is a chart that many of you have probably seen before, but what the point of this chart is, there really are no simple interdependencies. When you sit down and really start to map this out, you see that there are different relationships that have cross-cutting impacts on even the simplest of infrastructures, and it creates a spider web. And so, for example, things like pumping stations, storage and control systems for the oil sector. When the electricity goes down, you lose fuels and lubricants, and without transportation, you don't have goods and services, and the economy becomes immobile. So the whole idea here is that power is at the electric power is at the center of this spider web, and it begins to cascade in terms of its impact. The next slide basically discusses the changes to Presidential Policy Directive 21, which is the replacement policy for infrastructure. And it basically emphasizes that dependable supply of energy really underpins the operations across all critical infrastructure. And if you're a company, and I think we probably heard this in the last webinar, but the key is, what is it that we should focus on in these public-private partnerships so that we don't make it, we've got to simplify a very complex situation. But you can see at the very top level, the federal government, they've identified what the key infrastructures are. But until you really start to analyze it and think about it, it's hard to envision what these dependencies look like. And so the key here is to try and simplify this as much as possible and get it down to the operating level, as we mentioned before. But as you can see, in PPD 21, as they talk about resilience, they're really talking about the ability to withstand and recover from any type of effect, whether it's a deliberate attack, an accident, naturally occurring event. And so, but if you're in the government trying to figure out how all this works, you really got to rely on the private sector to play a major role in helping to understand this, because there's only so much the government can do. Next slide. Now, in the first webinar, it was really focused on private sector perspectives, and you can see here from this summary there was an emphasis on improving communication and coordination between sectors, as well as taking on an expanded regional approach to preparedness. And of course, for major companies, they don't really operate within boundaries of states and local jurisdictions. They cut across and operate basically in regions. So the more the public sector can, from what they're saying here, the more the public sector can organize itself in these regional frameworks and strengthening public-private relationships and communications, particularly pre-event, that's the key to success from what was said in the first webinar. Next slide. So anyway, you can see the private sector perspectives here. There were 2 polling questions, and there'll be some additional polling questions in this webinar. But what came out of the polling questions in webinar 1 was there was a sense that there needs to be more cross-sector training and exercises between the private sector and the public sector. And quite frankly, I'm very active through the consortium working with the National Capital Region's Regional Catastrophic Plan, and we're actually are focused on power restoration as a priority. and there was a power restoration workshop held down in D.C. Back on April the 30th, and that's a building block workshop that's driving towards a functional exercise in October, and the whole focus will be on how do you take the capabilities that were developed in the regional catastrophic projects and apply them in order to achieve more rapid power restoration, and the private sector has been very active in that exercise. And the key is how do you sustain that? How do you build the relationships? As was noted here, 70% said that relationship building with public-private sector communities is critical in the near term. And you know, everybody's busy, got lots to do. There's lots of distractions. So this process of building these public-private partnerships at the operational level, and I think that's the key, being able to do it at the operational level is how we're going to improve. Next slide. Today we're going to hear from the public sector, and we've got a terrific panel of very diverse folks from different public entities and government offices. We're going to hear today about the role of government during emergency and what the government needs from industry. So it's, you know, this sharing back and forth, okay, what does each domain need from the other? And we want to hear today a little bit about near-term operational solutions to reduce these timelines. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was around webinar 3. After we're done with this webinar, we'll have explored both the private perspective and the public perspective, and then we'll want to come back together on June the 4th for a couple hours and ask questions about what are the lessons learned, how do we communicate the best practices to you know, improve resilience against cascading impacts, and then how do we build upon other resiliency projects, particularly within the region, because there's a lot going on in the region, and we can benefit from that collaboration, which does take some time and effort, but once you build the relationships, that time and effort becomes much easier. So now I'm going to turn it back to Roy. Roy, you're going to introduce the panelists, and it's been a pleasure being with everybody this morning. I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that introduction. I'd like to take a moment now to introduce our panel members. As I introduce the panel members, on the screen you'll see a slide for each member that provides a brief perspective statement as well as a key takeaway message from each of our members. After the introductions, we will ask each panel member to give a brief overview of their agency and organization and their responsibilities. So first I'm going to go through all the list of panel members, and then we'll ask each of them to provide their overview. First, I'd like to introduce Bob Durando. He's General Manager, George Washington Bridge for Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Bob's been with the Port Authority for New York and New Jersey for 35 years, spending all but 3 of those years in facilitating operations. His most recent position is the General Manager of the George Washington Bridge and Bus Station since July of 2002. Next, we have Fred Hintemeister. Fred is the Critical Infrastructure Protection and Cybersecurity Specialist with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the Electricity Sector Information Sharing and Analysis Center. He provides UCG sector coordination, rapid mitigation development, and rapid mitigation delivery. He provides ES sector coordination for cyber, NLE 2012, Hurricane Sandy, the Boston Marathon recent exercises and events, and handles mission assurance liaisons. His key takeaway message is winning resilience strategy centers on reinforcing existing framework structures while adding stable capability and capacity at the edge. Focus on resilience value addition through improved information sharing and capability packages which can be sourced and applied rapidly, consistent with authorities and frameworks. Our next panel member is Brian Lacey, the Protective Security Advisor for New Jersey with the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Infrastructure and Protection. Brian serves as the DHS liaison for State and Local Emergency Operations Center to update the National Infrastructure Coordination Center on status coordination of critical infrastructure and key resources. Brian's key takeaway message is that National Infrastructure Coordinating Council functions include the situational awareness, information sharing and collaboration, assessment and analysis, decision support, and future operations. Next, we have Alice Lippert. Alice is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Infrastructure Modeling Analysis for the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability at the U.S. Department of Energy. Alice has over 30 years in federal service. In her position, she leads the DOE division responsible for grid modeling and assessments, transmission reliability, and clean energy analysis and programs, data integration and visualization, and energy infrastructure and risk analysis. Alice's key takeaway message is there's no substitute for education. People involved in emergency response in both the public and private sectors need a good understanding of energy infrastructure and energy markets. Our next panel member is Lieutenant Commander Brian McSorley. He's Assistant Chief for Safety and Security Operations, the U.S. Coast Guard, Sector New York. Brian works closely with port partners and interagencies to maintain and improve safety and security of maritime transportation systems for 5,700 plus commercial vessel arrivals and 200 plus facilities. He's also the Operations Section Chief for the National Incident Management System Type 345 incidents. His key takeaway lessons learned from Hurricane Sandy are relationships matter, the water goes where the water goes, and a regional coordination is necessary. Next up, we have Amy Post, Director of Transportation and Infrastructure. She's with the New York City Office of Emergency Management. Amy oversees planning efforts for natural and man-made hazards during major events, facilitates information coordination, resource requests, and decision-making. Her key takeaway message, it is essential to collaborate with utility providers to establish continuous, consistent, and reliable data exchanges to drive allocation, distribution, and potential needs for emergency responses. Next up, we have Dean Tackliff. He's a senior engineer with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. He's the Assistant Emergency Management Coordinator for State and Level Emergency Support Functions, the ESF-12. Board of Public Utilities, Bureau of Emergency Management and Security, with regulatory jurisdiction over investor-owned public utilities in New Jersey. Dean's takeaway message is building resiliency post-Sandy with electrical system hardening, tree trimming, distributed generation, and gas backup power. Our last panel member is Michael Warden. He's the Chief Electric Distribution Systems for New York State Public Service Commission. Mike is the Department of Emergency Management Manager at the New York State Public Service Commission. They are responsible for the oversight and utility planning of restoration activities, communication and utility restoration progress with the Governor's Office and sister state agencies, and after response lessons learned. His key takeaway message is effective communication is essential for an effective response. In the wake of Sandy, particular emphasis should be given to better defining protocols for dealing for food impacted entities. So I'd like to welcome all of our panelists this morning. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning and offering your insights and perspective. At this point, I would like to take a moment to have each of you provide a brief overview of your agency's roles and responsibilities during emergency events that involve power outages. And please, if you can, include any actions that you have taken to improve your future response efforts that you have undertaken recently. Bob Durando from the Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, would you like to start us off? Bob, are you with us? Okay, we'll come back to Bob. Fred Hintemeister from NERC, are you able to provide us an overview?
Yes, I can certainly do that. Thank you very much. I'll give a quick overview here. I'll focus on what and who is NERC, what and who is the ESI stack, and the actions we've taken to improve future response in the wake of Sandy. Importantly, I'm a little different than most of your other panelists because NERC is not the government. So most of your panelists here today are the government. NERC is actually an industry-funded organization with regulatory powers over the North American electrical grid and subject to the oversight of Capitol Hill and also FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and our primary mission is to ensure the reliability of the bulk power system. This is real important because, as Alice Lippert pointed out in her key takeaways, it's very important to understand the structure of the industry. And our industry, NERC, focuses on the bulk power system. So that's the high voltage transmission backbone. The electric sector is divided structurally into the bulk power system, and the bulk power system can be broken down from practical purposes as the generation, the transmission, the distribution, and the control system aspects of the sector. We focus on the understanding each of those, but our jurisdiction does not extend down to the distribution. That's important because in Hurricane Sandy, it was primarily a distribution event. The bulk power system was not at significant risk during Sandy. I provided the electric sector coordination during Sandy and focused on the bulk power system risk. There was very little to no risk in that area, but it was a major and important distribution event. NERC does its job through a number of means. It does collaborative standards development with industry. This includes mandatory and enforceable comprehensive critical infrastructure standards, as well as a wider body of standards, which also contribute to good cybersecurity, good critical infrastructure protection security, even beyond the SIP standards. It includes as well compliance functions associated with those standards for the utilities. It also includes reliability performance assessment and events analysis and coding. The events analysis and coding is very important because that helps us to digitize and understand the observable events in the grid and develop techniques, tactics, and procedures how to address them in response. Now, the ESISAC is operated by NERC, but it is separate as a security function from the compliance functions of NERC. This is very important because we want to cultivate among the utilities the comfort level that they can share non-compliance security information about the real-time operation of the grid with NERC through its ESISAC without fear of a fine or a compliance action. We're in the early innings of that development effort, but it's going quite well and we're tech enabling it. The ESISAC does three big things. Best way to think about it is ESISAC has the official hooks into the government threat and vulnerability community. So the ESISAC is the official talking point or liaison between the electric sector industry side and the federal government, as well as through federal government fusion into the SLTTG, which is the state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. So ESISAC provides sector coordination. ESISAC also provides rapid mitigation development and rapid mitigation delivery straight down to the participants in the sector when they need that during an event. Our actions to improve future response in a response event in the wake of Sandy. Number one, we've improved the bulk power systems awareness capabilities we have. We can look at the real-time science of the grid and tell whether things are going on around the country and in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. We have better threat and vulnerability and intelligence proprietary tools that we use. For us, it's a game of dynamic bulk power system risk assessment ongoing all the time. So as an event begins to unfold, we'll see that early, and we'll begin to coordinate the sector to address that. And then, as I mentioned, we're establishing a trusted collaborative environment to encourage that non-compliant security dialogue, the reporting, the initial indications and warnings coming up from the utilities into the ESISAC and then over to the government threat community. We've increased the security clearance credentialing of our staff. And NERC has developed a number of authoritative reports with the owner-operators in the sector, reports like the High Impact Low Frequency Report, reports like the Severe Impact Resiliency Task Force, and the Cyber Attack Task Force. I would urge each of you to look at the NERC website and look for a couple of these reports because they give great information on what folks can do to turn themselves from victims into participants before an event left a boom, so that you have a higher state of readiness going into response. We also have a grid security conference coming up in October. We put that on for the sector, for the industry, and we have a grid exercise coming up in November. So that's a quick wrap on NERC, ESISAC, who we are, and what we're doing to improve response in the wake of Sandy.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate that overview. I'd like to check with Bob Durango, Port Authority. Are you back online?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Would you like to provide a brief overview of the Port Authority and any actions you're taking to improve your responses?
Sure. Thanks very much. Port Authority owns and operates the Holland Tunnel, Lincoln Tunnel, George Washington Bridge, the Midtown Bus Terminal, the Uptown Bus Station, the Staten Island Bridges, area airports, Kennedy, Newark, LaGuardia, Teterboro, the PATH system, and New York and New Jersey ports. One of the takeaways from Sandy here, most Port Authority Hudson River crossing facilities have the advantage of being able to power up from either state. So electrical feeds from New York and New Jersey are present at most facilities. Some of those systems are more modern and more robust than others. In the case of the Holland Tunnel, it really didn't matter because it was underwater for Sandy. But the Lincoln Tunnel, for example, remained open. We powered up from New York here at the bridge because the grid in New Jersey had gone out. What we're doing as part of our post-Sandy program is to upgrade those systems. Right now, it requires that I have electrical staff go out to various locations on the span and manually transfer that electricity over from one state to the other. We're also looking at augmenting our existing generator system here at the facility and at all of our river crossings so that we can have as much generator redundancy as possible. That's pretty much what we're doing post-Sandy.
All right, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Next, I'd like to ask Alice Lippert from the U.S. Department of Energy for a brief overview.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. With respect to the Department of Energy, we are the lead agency with respect to responding to energy events or with respect to working critical infrastructure protection issues with DHS. So this authority is granted to us under the National Response Framework and, of course, as part of the new PPD8 National Preparedness Directive. During events, DOE has quite a few roles and responsibilities, and primarily we serve as a focal point for energy response and restoration issues, and of course addressing any policy decisions that need to be made with respect to energy infrastructure or systems. A big role that we do is we provide information through our situation reports. We do this, depending on the event and how catastrophic it is. We will issue twice daily reports. And of course, these reports are very useful because they are sort of a one-stop shop for information to the public. And, that includes our federal agencies, our state agencies, local governments, and of course the general public. And so the reports are put out on our website, and they contain quite a bit of information about the impacts to the energy infrastructure. So be it outages, electricity outages, pipelines, petroleum terminals, refineries, just anything that's related to energy we'll put in those reports. We'll also work closely with our federal partners, state partners, and of course the private sector to facilitate and assist in energy restoration. So, during Sandy, for example, DOE was activated under ESF 12. So not only did we deploy people to the various regions, but we had, and of course these were elevated calls. The Secretary of Energy was participated on daily calls with utility CEOs, utility executives. We participated in an interagency task force with FEMA on how to work through those sort of what we call bureaucratic roadblocks to make certain, that response was quick and efficient. We worked, we had our power marketing administration. They deployed people to parts of New Jersey to help, and I believe New York to some extent, but primarily New Jersey, to help with restoration. So it's a big part of what we do. We don't go out, we're not part of the crew. I mean, we don't hang line or put up poles, but we try to address those issues where there could be some impediments to restoration to make certain that these things are being handled efficiently. We'll also leverage the Department of Energy's expertise and capabilities within DOE. It's not just our office. We work closely with Fossil Energy, who has oversight of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And as you know, during Sandy, the Northeast Heating Oil Reserve was released for the first time. And that product, which was ultra-low sulfur diesel, was used by many first responders to aid in restoration. Will serve as whatever the federal point of contact for a variety of issues. And then lastly, which was a big impact during Sandy, was the fuel issues. So we were monitoring the fuel problems, trying to get some assessments on the damage to those facilities in the New York Harbor, Linden, New Jersey area. We were working closely with industry because the big question was kind of what was the supply status. It's not only what comes in there, but what leaves. When product comes in, for example, like Colonial Pipeline, it enters into a large number of terminals in the Linden, New Jersey area, but then product is also produced there by refineries and brought in through barges, and so trying to get a good status, a good handle on the supply situation was critical during that time. So DOE was not only working with the Coast Guard and a number of agencies, both state and local, but also with agencies that have purview on waivers. So with respect to issuing fuel waivers, with respect to issuing Jones Act waivers, with respect to working to make certain that those hour of service waivers by the Department of Transportation were extended. So, a lot of what we do, DOE does not, we don't have the purview to issue the waivers, but we work closely with our federal partners on the due diligence to make certain that those waivers, we provide the relevant information so that if waivers are to be made, they can be made quickly and done legally. So I think with that, I'll pause here. With respect to post-Sandy actions, DOE has issued its after action report, and that is available out on our website. And we've also been having quite a few meetings, some of them at a very high level with utility CEOs, oil and gas sector, but also working with our state partners. I know I've been working with New Jersey's BPU and their Homeland Security Office with respect to following up on the petroleum after action issues that happened in New Jersey during Sandy. So with that, I'll pause, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Alice. We appreciate that. Next up, I'd like to ask Brian Lacey from Department of Homeland Security, Office of Infrastructure and Protection, for a brief overview.
Yeah, hi. As indicated by Roy, my name is Brian Lacey. I'm the Protective Security Advisor, one of the Protective Security Advisors for New Jersey. The other one is Frank Westfall. We work for the Office of Infrastructure Protection, DHS. Just as a general overview, all states have Protective Security Advisors. The number of PSAs in a state is dependent on the size of the state, the population, the amount of critical infrastructure within the state. Let me talk about a little bit about our day-to-day job because it serves our emergency response job pretty closely. We're the DHS liaisons to the owner-operators, particularly in the private sector, of the critical infrastructure and key resources within a given state. And the relationships alluded to earlier are what we're tasked to do, is to go out to all those owner-operators, across all the sectors and establish relationships, and through things like our infrastructure survey tool, get an idea about the security posture, and more applicable to this conversation, the resiliency posture of all those critical pieces of infrastructure. And also understand the dependencies, both intersector and intrasector, for all those facilities. What that does is give us a lot of preloaded information, if you will, on those pieces of critical infrastructure, so that when there is an incident, be it man-made or natural, we have a knowledge base to fall back on, in an attempt to, as much as possible, be predictive about what the impact of any particular event on a piece of infrastructure, and then the interdependencies, the downstream impacts of the loss or reduction in capability of any particular piece of infrastructure. During an incident, we most typically will serve in the EOC, most likely the state EOC if it's a large enough event, to assist at the private sector desk, and I guess we'll talk more about that later when we talk about some lessons learned, to be that liaison between the private sector infrastructure folks, the state EOC folks, and then ultimately up to the national level, to the National Infrastructure Coordinating Center, to make sure our leadership in Washington at DHS has an understanding of what's going on the ground and the impact that negative or degradation of particular pieces of infrastructure will have in a cascading way, so that we can kind of get out in front of the resourcing that the federal government brings to bear in response and recovery activities. The NIC is a subcomponent of the NOC, and excuse me for the acronyms. The NOC is the National Operations Center, where all this stuff from all these different agencies comes together to help direct and guide that federal effort to help alleviate the situation on the ground, and then recovery later on. So I think that's pretty good an overview of what I do. I'll turn that over.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. And you brought up a good point to all our panelists. During the conversations today, if you can spell out acronyms as much as possible, a number of our audience members may not be as familiar as you are with some of these. So if you can try to make a note to spell out acronyms, I think that will help the audience understanding of your comments. So thank you, Brian. Next up, we'd like to hear from Brian McSorley from the U.S. Coast Guard.
Good morning. During and after an event, Coast Guard has a few roles and responsibilities, quite varied actually. Immediately, we're focusing on search and rescue within the port and offshore. There's certainly the environmental response component in terms of, Sandy's a perfect example, 450,000 gallons of oil spilled in the harbor that need to be cleaned up. And then we're also providing for and maintaining security throughout the port and offshore as well. But in addition to all that, we're also charged with preserving and ensuring the steady flow of commerce through the port. As Dennis mentioned in the opening comments, we fall into that category of agencies that have a tangential role with energy infrastructure. We don't necessarily regulate it or work on it directly, but because we are regulating cargo and ships coming into the port and the facilities where they berth, and those facilities handle fuel oil, petroleum products, coal, what have you, for the energy infrastructure, we have a role in that regard. And then also, those facilities need energy in order to handle the goods. So we do find ourselves working with energy and electrical companies and trying to get information here and there throughout the follow-on to an event. To coordinate the restoration of the supply chain, we head up a group within the port referred to as the Maritime Transportation System Recovery Unit. The acronym for that is MTSRU. And with me in the room here is Ann Morrissey, who actually heads up the MTSRU, and she can speak a little bit more specifically about what the MTSRU does leading up to and following a significant event, of which Sandy and even Irene were good examples.
So the Marine Transportation System Recovery Unit is a tool that the Coast Guard uses to work with federal, state, local government partners as well as industry in order to first track the status of the marine transportation system, whether it's channels, waterways, or facilities, and then to try to do what we can to facilitate the resumption of commerce. So in the case of Sandy, again, energy was a large factor simply because of the fact that many critical maritime facilities were without power and thus couldn't resume their operations until power resumed. And so, again, as Brian mentioned, the Coast Guard's role isn't directly in the energy sector, but it is in, understanding what is happening in the energy sector and how that impacts the maritime transportation system. And again, our role is to work together with the port community, federal, state, and local to really understand the impacts of the maritime transportation system, communicate those, and then work across agencies and with industry to try to facilitate resumption of commerce.
So with that, we'll leave it, turn it back to Roy, and engage as it comes up.
Okay, thank you both for joining us this morning and providing that overview. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Amy Post from the New York City Office of Emergency Management. Amy?
Sure. So New York City Office of Emergency Management is the coordinating agency for New York City. Most important is that means we don't take on a command role in any kind of an event. Instead, we're the ones that bring agencies together to problem solve and come up with some sort of a solution. So during an actual or a threatened power outage, New York City OEM proactively monitors the status of the city's electrical system. We're trying to assess the risk of power disruptions and find out, whether or not they might have significant effects on the city's population or also the operation of critical facilities. One of the first steps we always work with the operator to try to do is to define the geographic extent, and then we work to identify the affected critical infrastructure within that area. We're also looking at-risk populations, and we're continuing to assess the need to increase our response during the power disruption. Through the EOC, OEM maintains a defined flow of communication and information. This is really important and kind of goes to one of the things that we're trying to improve post-Sandy is the whole idea of a better process for data collection. OEM also works with other city agencies to assist the utilities in their outreach efforts to customers, whether it's various messaging that the utilities need to do, whether it's working with life-sustaining equipment customers. And then the last thing, we coordinate the prioritization and the purchase and delivery of emergency fuel that might be needed for the continuity of critical operations. So that's what I have for now. I'll turn it back.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Next up, we have the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, Dean Tackliff. Do you have a brief overview on any actions you're currently undertaking?
Thanks. Good morning. The Board of Public Utilities has regulatory jurisdiction over investor-owned public utilities in New Jersey with a mandate to provide safe, adequate, and proper service. The BPU also serves as the lead agency for the state-level Emergency Support Function 12 with the mission of emergency response coordination between the State Office of Emergency Management and other state and federal agencies and the utilities. In addition, the BPU monitors the restoration process and helps prioritize restoration of critical infrastructure. Following Hurricane Irene, the BPU commissioned a report to evaluate utility performance from that storm. The report resulted in an order with 106 recommendations covering areas such as preparedness, communications, response, and infrastructure reliability issues. The implementation of that order and the review of the recommendations is still ongoing, with the majority of these recommendations anticipated to be complete by August 1st. And that's all I have at the moment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dean. And last up, we have Michael Warden from the New York State Public Service Commission. Michael?
Thank you, Roy. We're with the New York Commission. Similar to New Jersey, we regulate the utilities in New York State. Our process really starts before an event with emergency preparedness. We have a rule in place that requires utilities to have emergency plans on file with us and hold drills periodically. Anytime there's a major storm event, as was happened with Irene, Lee, and the October snowstorm in 2011, we do an after-action review of the utilities and sort of a lessons learned and try to make improvements. During an event, we monitor restoration activities in a couple of ways. One is we have a field present at each of the utilities, and secondly, we're having communication with the leadership at the utilities about the restoration progress. We also facilitate information flow amongst various state agencies. For example, we collect hourly outage data, map that information so that state agencies have that information available to them. And of course, we, like many others, I'm sure, get involved in coordination and resolution of various issues. During this last Sandy event, we actually had the electric utilities in the state's Emergency Operations Center along with us to help facilitate this process. In terms of after action, any storm event in which, or just general outage event in which utilities have service out for more than 3 days, they're required to file an after action report with the Commission. We have several special initiatives, I guess I would call them, related to Sandy. We're doing a number of storm hardening projects that we're trying to process with each of the utilities. We're doing a special review of the electric emergency plans that have been filed this April 1st with the Commission. These have actually been issued to the public for comment. And finally, we developed a scorecard, a draft scorecard. It's essentially a proposal for how we would assess utility performance during an emergency response. Thank you. Roy, back to you.
Understanding of what your agencies do and what your organizations do, so I appreciate you taking the time to educate us on those activities. Before we get into the direct questions to our panel members, I'd like to first remind the audience on the GoToWebinar tool on your right, there should be a question toolbox. Feel free to type any questions you have to the panel members during our discussion. We'll receive those here at the moderator team, and we'll try to address those questions to the panel members during the webinar or at the end of at our Q&A session as best as possible. With that, I'd like to get into the discussion with our panel members. Our first question deals with information and other needs from industry to the federal government. I'd like to get a sort of state and local perspective first, and then ask some of our federal representation what type of information they need. So I'd first like to direct the question to Dean Tackliff at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and ask him what information do you need from critical system operators during an emergency event to support restoration and response work for the utilities, and are there any other needs you need from industry to support emergency response? Dean?
Well, one of the biggest pieces of information that we were looking for in trying to quickly restore, in particular, water systems and other critical infrastructure, were things like meter numbers, circuit numbers, pieces of information other than a street address and a company name, which we tend to get a lot of. Just having those little pieces of information to pass on to our the electric utilities, it cuts down on the time required to figure out which areas need actual restoration, and kind of shave down all the time looking up account information like that. Also, one of the things we needed to find out from these systems were when it comes to prioritization. There really isn't a chart of each sector's priority necessarily, other than possibly hospitals being the top of the list. after that, it turns into a very big field of daily prioritization and what I kind of call a consequences-driven prioritization. How many customers does this sector, this particular place serve? What are the regional effects or cascading interdependencies that will help prioritize the movement of what's going to be a very limited amount of resources from the electric utilities to try to get them restored. It's also important to know what components of these systems absolutely need to be restored and which ones can be held off in an emergency operations mode, with the understanding that full restoration and normal operations are going to be sometimes several days to possibly weeks away. That's what I had on that.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Next, Amy Post from the New York City Office of Emergency Management. You had mentioned in your opening remarks in trying to improve process of data collection. So what type of data are you interested in from the industry?
Sure. So what we really need is accurate and up-to-date system status and outage information, and ideally estimated time of restoration is incredibly important to us as well. I think we're well aware of how difficult some of this can be for the power companies themselves due to the dynamic nature of power outages and complex interdependencies. But we found that data management is really the key to our success. What we do with data is we can improve agency outreach to affected populations by using data analytics. And so clear and accurate data presented in a way that paints the big picture, because we have such a big city, it really can help us prioritize resources. And it also helps us maintain a consistent message along with the power company that helps with public messaging, so we're all on the same page and everybody is hearing the same thing.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. So there you have a couple perspectives from the state and local. I'd like to turn this question over to the federal side. First, I'd like to pose it to Brian Lacey and then follow up from Alice Lippert. So Brian, from the DHS, what types of information needs or other needs do you have from industry that DHS needs?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that. One of the things we've done, as I indicated earlier, we do a lot of outreach to the owner-operators of critical infrastructure. Historically, our emphasis has been on security posture. It was planned pre-Sandy, but as it turns out, it rolled out post-Sandy. Was another application, another module of that effort, which is our Resiliency Management Index. And it's incumbent on us to now go back to all the people that we've established these very good relationships with and do the application of that Resiliency Management Index, because it gives us a greater sense about their redundancy, their input dependencies, their output dependencies, and those kinds of things, so that we can again understand up front what a catastrophic event or an incident the impact it will have, so we can, to the extent possible, be predictive in nature. During an event itself, constantly working with through the private sector desk or working directly with the owner-operators in an EOC, we need to be able to capture what the impacts of the storm are going to be, so that we can use a thing we call a special events and domestic incident tracking tool, make sure our federal leadership understands exactly what's going on the ground and the impact it's going to have over the next 24 to 72 hours, so that we can better coordinate response. So there's a lot of work we as PSAs can do with critical infrastructure owners now that will help us respond better to the next event. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Alex, do you have any information needs or other needs you have from industry for the DOE?
Well, we do. As we know, as you know, I mentioned we produce those situation reports, and there's a lot of information that needs to be put in the report for a variety of reasons. But what's key with respect on the electricity side is getting the outage information or the outage data from the utilities. And I would say for the most part we do get that information. Often there's sometimes some of the companies, their websites change, or there could be a bit of a lag in how they update their information. But for the most part, the outage data are there. And of course, what does that mean? Well, we're putting out outage information for the whole area. It's not just one company. Now, if the impact is so local, it is just one company. Like currently, we are dealing with Oklahoma, so we're looking at information in Oklahoma for Oklahoma's, the power company that's responsible for providing power in those 2 counties that were impacted. But sometimes you need a larger perspective. So we'll put in our report the outages by state. And that information is very useful to our federal community, particularly FEMA, because they like to know at a county level or even at a zip code level, where the shelters need to be stood up, where there should be food, ice, water, those kind of health or lifeline services that need to be provided. So the outage data is very important. Same with restoration information. When are the lights going to come back? And that way communities can make plans, because that's very important for them to have. Also the damage impacts. So if these companies have large impacts to their infrastructure, it's good to share that with the community, because it manages the expectations, because then communities know how to respond. If people can stay locally, fine, but if not, if there's going to be electricity for days or maybe even weeks, people may need to move to different parts of the region to seek shelter or whatever. So those are the 3, I think, that are really, for us on the electricity side, is the outage data, the restoration, and those damage impacts. And of course, how the utilities communicate that within their service territories.
Thank you, Alice. Fred from NERC. Fred, during your opening comments, you had said that NERC is increasing bulk power systems awareness. We'd like to know how this information is being communicated, and if you can briefly explain the difference between the NERC, bulk power reliability, and distribution of power.
Yes, sure. Just at high level, the ESISAC receives its information from 4 different sources. That would be the bulk power systems information you're talking about, which much of which comes from DOE and NERC. The government fusion information, which comes from DHS, DOD, and DOE. The sector coordination information that falls out of the high-level leadership sector coordination meetings, which usually I begin the battle rhythm there and then turn it over to Tim Roxy or Jerry Cawley as things develop. And then the entity reporting that comes up from the utilities themselves, and that falls into 2 categories. Compliance reporting, which is like the OE 417s, which are industry reports, and non-compliance security dialogue, which is what we're trying to create and encourage with the entities at this time. The bulk power systems information that I was talking about before, a little drill down there for you, just give you kind of an illustration. These are things that get at the real science of the grid. So for example, as something's happening, like a hurricane coming in or a cyber attack, we want to correlate that to, is it having an operational impact on the grid, getting down to service to customers. You have the bulk power system, which is the high voltage transmission backbone, and then you have the distribution events, which is once that power gets off the backbone and into a major metro or into a community, how it actually reaches the individual customers, the residential customers, and the companies, industry in the area. The bulk power systems information brings in the real science of the grid so we can see if there's any operational impacts there. Things like we have a system called Situational Awareness for FERC, NERC, and the regional entities. We have another system that brings in data from the PMUs, or the phaser measurement units, out in the field. These bring in bits of information like voltage and frequency and phase rotation. reactive power and ground-induced currents in case there's an EMP event. We can also correlate this with information we have from our event analysis portion of NERC, which has digitally coded out different observable events on the grid in the past, so that we can, correlate operational effects from anything that we're seeing out there in the cyber world or the all-hazards world that might be creating a problem on the ground. So to sum it up, it's the real science of the grid that comes in over those BPSA systems internally to us. And we also benefit from cross-sector reports from other sectors and correlate that with it. Things can be very basic but helpful to us. Things like in Sandy, a big one for us was, are the ATMs up? The cash machines at banks around the metro region. We could tell if an ATM machine was down, or if there was a community with ATMs down, and that report was coming in from the financial services sector, for example. Well, that meant they probably likely didn't have power restored at distribution levels in that community. So we could correlate all kinds of information like that. Hope that's helpful for you.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to just ask any other panelists, would they have any other information needs that they'd like to share that haven't already been covered by the panelists that have already spoken? Excuse me.
Yeah, Roy, this is Dennis. Could I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a follow-up for Fred. Fred, as we're designing our exercise in the Mid-Atlantic region, we've found that in talking with the public sector, state and local folks, as well as the power companies at the table of the design process, this issue of reliability comes up. And there was discussion about whether we should have the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland interconnect involved. And it gets to be a little hazy as to how that relationship works, but because the power companies don't necessarily feel like they can speak to that. And so do you have any advice as we're designing these exercises and doing training as to how these interconnects or NERCs should be involved? Because it appears like in a major multi-state disaster or catastrophic event, which is the focus of this effort, the NERC would probably be involved, because apparently the reliability has to be established as a priority before you can start doing distribution, is what we're being told. Does any of this make any sense? And do you have any recommendations about how we would go at designing our exercise to bring this into play?
Yeah, sure. I'll have a global comment that's super brief, and then a quick tactical comment on how you can loop the sector in on your exercise planning. My global comment is that reliability is a very broad topic and a very nuanced topic. And NERC is not an operator, but we are operationally informed. The highest level operators would be the reliability coordinators and below. They're the organizations you're talking about. Resiliency builds into reliability. So resiliency is just a small part of that, but an important part. How the grid might respond to an event and bounce back from it, and how we can shorten that time loop on restoration and recovery for you. The more tactical comment I have on how you might loop the sector in to develop your exercises is, I'd suggest a good first start, since it is a very nuanced topic, probably too detailed for this audience. I would recommend that once you get your exercise objectives together, you fly those by me, and I can give you a little guidance on who best to wrap into that process and how to build out your exercise experience.
That would be great. Thank you, Fred.
Sure, no problem.
And Michael Warden from New York State Public Service Commission, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that you've got various levels of distribution, transmission, the bulk power, and a lot of this stuff is going on simultaneously. So, to some extent, you're going to restore at a bulk power level, but you're likely going to have activities going on at all levels at the same time. Sandy was predominantly a distribution event, but there were nuances of the bulk power system in New York, as the New York ISO, that were involved in some of those recovery efforts. Whereas if you had an event like the 2003 blackout, the bulk system is really the driver for that. But for this Sandy event, I think the driver was more the distribution system. Just my thoughts.
Yes, hi, this is Fred Hintermeyer. Can I make a quick follow-up comment to that?
Sure, go ahead.
That's exactly right, what he just said there. And it might help the other players to understand that when a catastrophe like Sandy begins to happen, here at NERC, we go into two battle rhythms at the same time. One is more at the ESF-12 level. That's closer to the Emergency Operations Center and the area of response. That is typically more distribution-oriented. And typically our bulk power systems awareness staff down in Atlanta will plug into that and provide government briefings to government entities and to regional entities in the sector on that rhythm. At the same time, I'll plug in myself from the ESISAC into the sector coordination leadership rhythm that usually happens out of the assistant secretary level at DHS, where they bring all the critical infrastructure sectors together. It's important to understand that for the other participants on this call, so that you know that it's exactly true. We are prioritizing bulk power system risk reduction along with those immediate urgent needs in the AOR, in the area of response. So, for example, in Hurricane Sandy, I fielded many questions from Government Fusion on things like, hey, can you prioritize major hotels in Lower Gotham because they're lily pads for emergency responders flowing in? That's very tactical, very ESF-12 oriented, and we can field that request and communicate that prioritization into the companies. But at the same time, we're prioritizing our restoration efforts in a way that would reduce the risk to the North American bulk power system. So we have to bring them together in calculus as to how we prioritize those issues. And that's a complex effort, but that happens here at NERC in conjunction with the operational entities, reliability coordinator and below.
So I think that this discussion is highlighting, the complexities of our electric system as was indicated in our introduction presentation. So I'd like to continue on with the conversation, and as we indicated in the introduction presentation, there was a number of solutions that were offered in the first webinar series with the lifeline and electric sectors. So I'd like to get a perspective from our panel members here today on a reaction to those solutions that were suggested and to see if they have any additional solutions that they'd like to add to that list. So first off, I'd like to ask Bob Durando from the Port Authority if you have any thoughts on the solutions that were offered from the first webinar, and if you have any additional solutions you'd like to share with the audience today.
Sure. Thanks again. I'm looking at those recommendations, and I see that even pre-Irene and Sandy, as an agency, the Port Authority has taken up the regional approach to vulnerability assessments, emergency planning and response in particular, and pre-event interaction. So, for example, we get together on a quarterly basis with our partners at the MTA tunnel and bridge facilities, so that in the event of an Irene or a Sandy or some of the major snow events we've had over the last 18 months or so, that we have a coordinated response, so that, for example, the Verrazano isn't open, but we're going to open up the Staten Island bridges, or vice versa, that the Verrazano is going to open and we're not ready to open up the Staten Island bridges, because then that would just create a traffic nightmare. So those types of gatherings occur on a quarterly basis. We're also in the process of planning with those folks at MTA a tabletop exercise that I'm sure as a result of this webinar will include Con Ed and public service in, just to establish and maintain contact with those folks. Another interesting thing that Port Authority facilities participate in, and my co-panel panel member Brian Lacey would be very familiar with this, is a program called TEACS. That's the Texas Engineering Extension Service. A number of Port Authority facilities, to include airports. My staff and I have been. Staten Island is going in the near future. You get a group of your facility staff and your partners, both on the New York and New Jersey side. So FBI, Bergen County OEM, Fort Lee, which is our host community here at the bridge, NYPD, FDNY, and the TEACS folks who are first responders or former first responders will come out, assess your response capabilities, and develop a scenario where Incident Command 100, 200, and 300 are utilized. So for example, 50 of us from this general area here at the Port Authority, Bergen County in New York City, went down to Texas last April and participated in a number of tabletop exercises. So that served a number of purposes. We obviously got to reacquaint ourselves with those folks, meet new people, and we're in the process of planning a full-scale exercise in October. So we're maintaining those relationships, which are two of the recommendations that I'm looking at here from webinar number 1. So I think we're well on our way to complying with some of these recommendations.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Brian Lacey from DHS, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think Bob's emphasis on that teach thing is a good one. And you know, thinking on the, you know, that tends to focus on the public sector to a significant degree, but not entirely. But in thinking about it, just as Bob brought it up, you know, for critical infrastructure partners, I think that would be, you know, an absolutely great resource if it could be brought to bear. And, you know, happy to talk in more detail about that with the exercise development team. But there was an acknowledgement in the Port Authority that their facilities obviously don't exist alone. So sending Port Authority only people down to Texas after a long pre-train, and by the way, that was all DHS funded through UWASI grant funds. Recognizing that we rely on mutual aid, we rely on state, local, and regional responders and agencies to support the Port Authority's facilities, I think was a unique and very rewarding experience. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody offline about that if they're interested. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Brian McSorley from the U.S. Coast Guard, you offer a unique perspective from your point of view, and we'll be curious if you have any comments on the recommendations that were provided from last webinar, and if you have any ones from your perspective that you'd like to add.
The recommendations provided prior, you know, I think the number one, the relationships matter, which is, you know, ties in right closely with our key takeaways, as well as the regional approach. I think that really, I guess, applies whether you're talking about energy infrastructure, cargo diversion, coordination, really at any level where you're involving multiple jurisdictions and industry. The thing that we saw, particularly in terms of relationships and regionality, is that, as Dennis had mentioned initially, industry and commerce do not necessarily recognize local, state, jurisdictional lines. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes industry works a lot better across state lines than we do. And so when we're looking at the Port of New York, New Jersey, and we're talking about the Maritime Transportation System recovery, we're talking about it in the context of the Port of New York, New Jersey. But things that happen here have effects throughout the East Coast and even overseas. For instance, when we shut down the port for 4 days following the storm, because we couldn't, you know, we needed to check the channels, we needed to check the docks, the berths, and whatnot, and then, of course, we had to get power to the facilities in order to handle goods. That meant that all of that cargo either sat offshore or it was diverted to other ports. So in cases of, say, you know, Norfolk, you had, they were running at about 185% capacity because they were handling a lot of overage from New York. Where this ties in is, you know, granted, Norfolk, that probably had implications on their energy grid down there as well. But most importantly is that then, you know, just like with the grid, we have to get that cargo, that commodity up here. And when I say we, I mean we, you know, regionally, not we, the Coast Guard, have to get that commodity up to its designee and have to be creative in ways to make that happen. So I think, again, the regional approach, if we're talking across jurisdictions, across regionalities, across ports, and coordinating for a major event one place that'll have spillover effects to other places, that's probably from our perspective, the most important takeaway.
Thank you, Brian. Alice Lipper from U.S. Department of Energy, during your opening remarks, you mentioned a couple of items of credentialing as well as sort of being a point of contact for public and private partnerships and such. Do you have any reaction to the recommendations that were offered in the first webinar, and any that you would like to add to this from your perspective?
Well, I think it's a good start. It's a good list. There are, of course, other types of actions that could be addressed, like during Sandy, and I know we keep referencing Sandy, and of course many of us have had experiences with other storms, but Sandy is the sort of the freshest to us. But they designated the electricity sector as the crews as first responders, and I thought that was a good action. And I'm hoping in the future that kind of action is taken, or it's made part of the regular routine, because sometimes crews come in and they are not part of the first responder community, and they should be. So that's one thing I would recommend. And we've worked closely. The gentleman who opened up the session today, and we've also worked closely with Tom Moran from All Hazards Consortium. They've been doing some really good work in this area with respect, and I don't know, can the audience participate on or do they only have to, can they only participate via the questions on the screen? Can they say a few words? I don't know if Tom Moran is on, but I'd like for Tom to speak a little bit about some of the activities they got going on with how to increase the crews, how to shorten their times when they arrive to localized areas, making sure the tolls are up, they can get through toll booths easily, wait facilities easily, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are a number of activities that we've been working with industry as well within the government, and of course, some of this is streamlining the approaches, the credentialing, the first responders, of course, increasing, how we all work together during an event. Exercises, of course, are always very beneficial for that. And back in 2011, as a matter of fact, DOE conducted 4 major regional exercises across the country with all the states that participated in the State Energy Assurance Planning activity. And so that was very useful and very helpful because all of the scenarios dealt with some kind of energy impact.
Okay, thank you, Alice. And I don't think Tom is actually on the call right now, but Dennis Schrader, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, that would be fine. And thanks, Alice. That was a great point. Tom has been working with New Jersey and Pennsylvania over the last couple of years on this fleet movement initiative, and they issued a report just this last spring with the results of the fleet movement. But during Sandy, they had the connectivity to the CIOs and other key people in the states to very quickly break through some of these barriers, because what the utility industry will say is when they have people traveling from far away and their trucks and crews show up, if they have to deal with each state as an individual entity to move through, it really lengthens the time to get to the task at hand. And so what this fleet movement group has been doing, and we're now applying those findings to the National Capital Region exercise that's being developed. But this whole fleet movement group is really digging in at the operational level. For example, if somebody from Florida Power and Lights is sending trucks with a license plate from Florida, if they can go online and just set up an Easy Pass with those license plates, then they can just move quickly through every Easy Pass station regardless of the state. That's just one simple example, but you're right on the money. And those are operational things that really need to be worked be pre-incident with the operators. It's not really policy, but it's more operational planning at a detailed level. So there's a lot more that I can say, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, maybe Dennis, this is Alice again, would be helpful if we had a meeting with AHC at the end of January, and the after action report from that meeting is posted on your website. And it may be beneficial if BCS could or you could give that link to BCS, and then after this session that could be posted, because there's a lot of good information in there, and of course some of the actions that are going to be taken for future emergency events.
Will do.
All right, thank you both. And I think Fred Hintermeister from NERC would like to add to the discussion.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to add that one of the things we noticed at the sector coordination levels in both Sandy, but also more in other exercises and so forth, is that the federal government could prospectively play a role in providing scalable capacity and sourceable capability packages, particularly at the end of the UCGs. When a unique or novel crisis happens, the Unified Coordination Group goes into action and they have things that they need to solve, but you have to be able to put fingers on a capability package quickly. Now, those capability packages could be public sector or private sector. They ideally should be both, but those should be identified, left to boom, and be sewn together in a package that can be sourced. And the government has the capability to do that. They already do it on the public sector side for themselves. That's one way that they could be more facilitative of the public-private partnership in response. I would also add that anything we can do to turn victims into practical participants in an event, Craig Fugate likes to talk about that a lot of times, is very, very helpful. And sometimes that comes down to crisis communications messaging. So, having a coordinated script and messaging between state levels and local levels in government. We saw some divergence there during Sandy. That needs to be ironed out. And I think there were some great AAR items in the DOE report that Bill Bryant put together. So I don't know if folks have access to that, but that summarizes some good pointers as well. Thanks.
Yeah, that report is what I mentioned is out on our website.
All right, thank you both. Amy Post from does the Office of Emergency Management of New York City have any solutions that they'd like to suggest?
And I would just agree with all of the recommendations that were made in the first webinar. From our perspective, the need for regional and localized ETRs is really one of the most important things and the thing that we're looking for. And so I would also emphasize the importance of the pre-event interaction. I think we do a lot of that in New York City, and we're looking to do even more going forward. But it goes a long way to improving interaction during an emergency. So, yeah, I would agree with each of those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. And Michael Worden, does the New York State Public Service Commission have anything to add?
I'd like to also emphasize the need to do better on regional localized ETRs. I think that's really been a point of emphasis for us for quite a few years and continues to be one. I do think we've made improvements, but I think we've seen in the recent events over the last 2 years that there's more improvements that need to be made. On the public-private relationships and communication, I think the one area of emphasis that we see in New York State on communication is with regards to these flood-prone areas or the areas that were flooded out. While we always need to improve communication between the public-private sectors, and obviously we still need to do so, the stuff that went on for the flooding during Sandy and also during Lee in the Binghamton area was somewhat unique and something that hadn't been experienced as much. And we have each of the municipalities has their own different protocols for how they can deal with those customers that are out of power. And I think it's important that we take advantage of the experience during Sandy and Lee and build on that so that down the road these things aren't so complicated.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all to our panelists for that discussion. I think that was very insightful. We appreciate that. At this time, we'd like to offer our audience their first opportunity to be involved in the webinar, and we'd like to pose our first audience polling question. So posted, you should see a question now to your screens. And we'd like you to, from the list provided, select the top 2 key near-term government solutions from your perspective. We realize this isn't a comprehensive list, but these are 5 items that we've selected from the discussion that we've been hearing. So at this moment, if the audience could take the time to select their top 2, we'll give you a few seconds to provide your responses, and then we'll ask our panel members for some reactions to those results. So our results are coming in now live. We're about 50% of our participants have voted so far. We'll give a few more seconds for the rest to get their selections in. Okay, and we'd just like to say that if any of the panelists want to recommend other reports or tools, please email the information here to the BCS and the moderator team. We can send that to the registrations of all of the 3 webinar series and include the findings of the report next month. Okay, at this point, I think we've received most of our responses from our audience. We thank you for taking the time to make those selections. We'll send those results live here. And there you can see the results from our audience polling. So from the list of the near-term government solutions, we can see that the top selection is with 58% is the regional approach for planning and response with the regional ETR. Next, with 52%, was regular meetings with stakeholders to coordinate response, followed by, with 40%, coordinated crisis communications messaging, and then lastly, with 10%, scalable capacity packages to facilitate restoration. So thank you, audience, for providing your selections. I'd like to open it to the panel members to see if they have any reaction and feedback from the polling. Bob Durando from the Port Authority, do you have any response?
Looks pretty much like what we're doing here at the Port Authority, the coordinated stakeholder responses with MTA, our regional partners here up in Fort Lee and Fort Washington. So I would agree 100%.
Okay. Amy Post, New York City Office of Emergency Management.
Yeah, and I would just add to the regular meetings with stakeholders to coordinate response. One of the things we're doing here in New York City is we're really trying to, like I've been talking about, improve the data exchange. So in those meetings, we're talking about exactly what data and in what format and how often do we want it. And if we can establish this ahead of time, I think everyone kind of knows what to expect, and it really improves the data exchange and improves communication between the city and the utility providers.
Okay, Dean Tackliff from the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. Any feedback on the response from the audience?
Well, I would agree with the ETR issues. Like it was mentioned previously, one of the biggest issues we had from Sandy was this enormous demand from the public and local officials for accurate and timely ETRs. It's one of the best things you can provide them to drive decision making for any number of issues from shelterings and evacuations. We've been driving our utilities to provide additional information on type of infrastructure that are in their neighborhoods, so that the local officials can have a better situational awareness of what type of infrastructure is in their townships, and interconnections that are going to be worked on to get them back up and running again. It's a process of educating the local officials on what's in their neighborhoods and educating the public on what they need to do to prepare for these type of emergencies.
Okay, thank you. A topic of discussion from the first webinar was the need to help the public establish realistic expectations for power restoration, which involves better educating the public on the electricity restoration and its complexities. Do any of you on the panel see a role for government in working with industry to assist the public education process? I'd open that up to anybody on the panel who'd like to provide a response.
Well, this is Fred Hintermeister from NERC ESISAC. We'd be pleased and supportive to integrate with our government partners in enabling that kind of understanding if it's helpful to the cause, and it probably is.
Yeah, this is Alice Lipper from Department of Energy. I'm sorry, did somebody, Fred, are you finished?
Yes,
go ahead, Al.
Okay. Excellent idea. By the way, your comment back to the polling, I thought the information, I think I would have polled the same way. So I think regional coordination is very, very important. To addressing something that's catastrophic. With respect to working on the communications and, of course, power restoration, we work closely with industry. There have been a number of events prior to Sandy where we've stressed, with companies the importance of putting out estimated restoration times. So we think that's key, and we do a lot of that. We work closely with the Edison Electric Institute. We do work closely with NERC. So a lot of collaboration with the private side and, of course, the public side in addressing these issues, because we think they're very beneficial, and keeping the public informed during an event is so important.
Michael Worden from the New York State Public Service Commission.
Yeah, we have a lot of outreach and education programs that we do traditionally at the PSC, but I think the emergency, this whole area is an area that we probably haven't done as much as. And these events from the recent years kind of indicates to me that we should be doing more. Now that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm saying the PSC should be doing them, but we should be really encouraging the utilities to do more, and maybe helping guide them in terms of what it is they should be doing. So I think it's an area that should get more attention.
Thank you, Michael. Do any of the other panelists have any reactions to the polling? Okay, thank you again, audience, for providing your inputs. Oh, I'm sorry, was there someone who wanted to say something?
Well, this is Mike Worden. I just reemphasize that the meetings with the stakeholders, to me, that's all about communication. And, you really need to communicate. We're always telling our operating folks at the utilities that, they're not focused on communication. That's handled by another group within the company many times. But they need to make it so that their people can communicate well with the outside constituency. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good a job they did with restoration, they're going to be viewed as having done a poor job.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your feedback, and appreciate the panelists providing a response to those results. So as we get these solutions that are identified in webinar 1 and the ones that have been offered here by our panelists today, identifying the solutions is one step, but the next step is then trying to find out how to implement those solutions, and what are the best ways to do so. So I'd like to throw the questions to our panelists. First, Brian Lacey from DHS on what he thinks would be some of the next steps to better implement these near-term operational solutions? Brian?
Yeah, hi. So one of the things that New Jersey did following Sandy was a pretty comprehensive after-action review process going across all the sectors. There were a number of uniform themes that came out of that, obviously energy being pretty much number one on all of those. But another one was the importance of the private sector desk in the state EOC. Prior to Sandy, that had been a conceptual formation for New Jersey, and it took some shape during Sandy itself. But I think as a result of that, and it's really low-hanging fruit in terms of cost and effort, and I think it serves all the priorities that came out of that poll, is to formalize the composition and the functions of that private sector desk in the lead-up, during, and then post-event process. And I suspect, it differs from state to state on how that operates, if in fact it even exists at all. And I think one of the critical things we need to do is kind of capture that and implement it. And it doesn't have to be created out of whole cloth. As an example, in New Jersey, they have a thing called the Infrastructure Advisory Council, which has leading members across all the critical sectors, either from trade associations or from corporations, the larger utilities and providers, and they make up the basis of the private sector desk. So continue that effort, and all that entails, including them in the development of plans, including them in the development of training and exercises, I think would serve us quite well and would certainly address a lot of the after-action comments that were made by all the sectors. That's all I have. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Brian McSorley from the U.S. Coast Guard, do you have any perspectives from your point of view on how to best implement solutions?
Not specifically for the energy sector. I think the recommendations that were put up there that the audience polled on seem like they're pretty much part and parcel with a number of the recommendations we came up with concerning other segments, of critical infrastructure, other segments of critical resources, and really whether you're talking about cargo or you're talking about shipping or you're talking about energy, seems like the way of addressing them through regionality, through coordination, and through exercise planning is pretty much going to be the same regardless.
Okay, thank you. Bob Durando from the Port Authority, your thoughts on implementing solutions and any ideas you have that help facilitate those?
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, we have a pretty robust system of drills in existence with our partners at MTA and our host communities. What I mentioned earlier, as we put together this tabletop with the MTA folks, we'll be sure to include the energy providers, because there's been, as has been identified here, that's a critical role that so far has been missing from those exercises. So we'll be sure to add them in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other panelists? Do they have anything they'd like to add as far as implementing solutions and ways that they might suggest that?
This is Mike Warden. I think we all need to keep in mind this is going to be a lengthy and iterative process, and so we're trying to focus on some of what we see as the key issues, and we're going to use the utility emergency plans as kind of a foundation for some of that discussion. But then we're going to have to branch out and to have other sectors involved in that discussion. So it's trying to take what used to be kind of a compartmentalized product and make it more open to other sectors, so that other sectors can have not only input into the process but knowledge of how the process works.
Okay, and Amy Post from the Office of Emergency Management, New York City. Any thoughts from your end on solutions for implementation? Sorry.
Sure. I mean, from the local government perspective, we work together with our power providers on a pretty regular schedule pre-event, and so we have established upfront how we're going to communicate and exchange information. And so we do these quarterly meetings and other meetings as needed. We also do regular drills and exercises, which have been helpful. Another thing that we do with each other is whenever there's a new employee coming on, we make sure that everyone is briefed up. So if there's a new Con Edison employee, they get an OEM 101, so they understand what our role is and how we can support them, and vice versa. Anytime there's a new OEM employee, they get a Con Edison 101. So if they're ever, thrown into an emergency situation where they're coordinating utility issues, they understand the basics about the system. And so that's gone a long way. And I think the path forward is to continue to do this and maybe do even more of it.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the panel members and their thoughts on solutions to implementation. I know that's a big hurdle to overcome moving forward, and your insights are very appreciative. At this point, we'd like to go to some Q&A from the audience and direct some questions to the panel members. First off, I'd like to ask if anyone on the panel can provide a response to how effective is the 211 system in seeing that people with critical power needs are receiving power as quickly as possible. Anyone on the panel member able to address that? Okay. We'll try to follow up with that question for our audience member and get a response back after the webinar. Okay. Everyone says that coordination of getting emergency crews, electricity and fuel to the disaster area. Credentialing was mentioned as was Easy Pass, service for vehicles. Is this anecdotal, or are these plans in place across the region? What are the impediments to facilitating these actions if they are agreed upon as challenges? Any panelists want to take that on?
This is Bob Durando.
Go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah. In any of the weather events that we've experienced recently, as power companies responded from Ohio, Florida, Maine, Massachusetts, whatever, through our EOC, those entities were identified because we wanted to expedite them through our toll plazas as quickly as possible. We set up a process to minimize the amount of time that they would have to spend, directed them through particular toll lanes, take pictures, things of that nature. So the process is in place and has been in existence for the last couple of weather events here at the George.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other panelists have any other response to that question?
Yes, Brian Lacey. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but particularly for this region, rather than folks trying to reach out to individual agencies, there is an organization that's funded by all the major transportation agencies in this region called Transcom. I don't know if any work has been done with them to maybe become, I don't know if the right term is clearinghouse for these fleet movements across the tolls, but that one single entity does have very close and direct contact with all the major transportation agencies within this region. So I just offer that up as a potential avenue for that. Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to ask the panel members to see if what, if any, lessons learned in hurricanes Katrina or Rita were, or other events that have taken place, were you able to effectively apply during Hurricane Sandy affecting utilities. I open that up to the panel.
Well, this is Fred Hinchmeister at NERC ES-ISAC. In terms of barriers to restoration, it sounds like you're asking about from these recent events. One of the key elements was the element of flooding, combined with the character of the local geography where this happened. It was an urban, densely populated area with a large number of distribution connections underground in areas that could be flooded, where the components could be flooded, and that was a major element. This is one of the reasons why regional assessment and regional conversations among responders are so important, as your poll pointed out, because a lot of those issues are known and they can be addressed up front. So I think the respondents to the poll were right on it in terms of getting that regional dialogue going and trying to be prepared for the things that are likely to face their area.
Any other panel members have any lessons learned that they were able to implement from other emergency events that they were able to apply to Sandy?
Well, Roy, actually, this is Brian McSorley with the Coast Guard. We, though not necessarily directly involving the energy sector, we did apply a number of lessons learned from Irene the previous year, specifically in terms of communication from the captain of the port to industry and to port partners, and letting industry know when we were going to shut down the port, when we were going to stop allowing commercial vessel arrivals, when everything that was going to stay here had to be tied up. And what that did was, when we said, okay, everything that's coming in has to be here or has to be out by 6 o'clock in the evening Sunday before Sandy hit, that freed up the industry to then pass that on to their clients, to their constituent companies, to prepare ahead of time. So, for instance, if there was a tanker tied up at IMTT in Bayonne, and that tanker had to be underway and on its way out of the port at 6 o'clock at night on Sunday, that provided IMTT, a good 12 to 15 hours of prep time to make sure that they pulled their pumps out, cleaned all their drip pans, got any electrical service pumps that they could and put them at high ground away from the docks, so that when the storm hit and passed, there was a much easier follow-up, and they were able to get back into operations much quicker. This also allowed for them to bring emergency generators offline, take them apart, store them so that they could put them back together shortly after the storm, anticipating a power outage. Because what we found is that certainly on the industry side, within the port, within the last 15 years or so, both driven by, I'd say probably more dominantly driven by scale economics, but also driven by a desire to go green and meet EPA standards. A number of our industries along the waterfront have moved from providing their own sources of power through fuel generation to electrical, to going onto the grid, which is great, except when there's a power outage, then they lose their ability to function. So they were able to get those backup generators offline and stored based upon the early communication from the captain of the port to industry, and that was a lesson learned that we took from Irene the previous year.
All right, Brian, thank you much. I appreciate that very much. So at this point, we're coming close to our time here for our webinar. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating and taking the time out today to offer their perspectives and their insights. I think we had a great dialogue and a great discussion, and I think the audience was able to definitely pull some key items out of your discussions today. I think that it's clear that there's been considerable activity to improve collaboration and communication in this region as it relates to emergency events. And clearly, you know, this is a complex energy system that makes information sharing a very complex process, but the region is making moves in the right direction to overcome this hurdle. I think we've discovered that relationship building is key as we've been listening to our panelists and our discussion and hearing back from our polling audience. And we should continue to build public-private collaboration and training exercises as we exercise to integrate the energy sector. We do have one final question that we'd like to pose to the panelists here before we wrap up. Do any of the panelists have examples of significant misconceptions, either by industry or the general public, about the role of government in power restoration that have posed challenges in expectation management of actual response coordination? And how can this be corrected? Any panelists like to address that question?
I'll address that. Mike Warden. Sometimes there's misconception out that we have to deal with that, you know, we regulate the electric utilities. We do not direct their resources. We do not, you know, have people that go out and put poles up and hang wires. And so it's important for us, just like it's important for anybody else, to make sure that whoever deals with us understands what our role is, what our capabilities are, so that we can, you know, do them as best as possible.
And this is Amy Post from New York City OEM. I think it seems a little bit silly, but we can't turn the power back on. So, you know, we have a power disruption plan that does absolutely nothing to help turn the power back on. It's really focused on the, you know, all of the consequences of that power outage and how it's affecting the people of New York City. But it really does almost nothing to actually help, you know, turn the power back on.
And this is Brian McSorley from the Coast Guard. I think, you know, we're kind of in the same boat. While we regulate, let's use petroleum, for example, while we regulate petroleum handling facilities, we can't tell them what type of petroleum they will hold at their facility and they'll store. I mean, that's all market driven. So if there's a gasoline shortage in the port, there may be tons of petroleum in the port, but if it's not gasoline, it's not going to help people at the pumps. And then secondly, we can open up the port and bring gas tankers in or distillate tankers or whatever, but if they don't have a working facility to go to, then that gasoline's not going to get to the truck, to the pump, to the cars. So there is, I think, the intricacies and the interdependence of various modes and various nodes of infrastructure and commodity is really, you know, those, it's not necessarily subtlety, but those subtleties are hard to capture in a 30-second hit spot on the news, but that really is the critical piece being missed in you know, all of this stuff.
Yeah, Roy, this is Dennis Schrader. I had one major area, if I could add it in. We have found in our exercise process with the Fleet Movement Group that this issue of what does communication mean relative to managing expectations. When you say communications, oftentimes within the government, the thought is, well, I'll just send my PIO, my public information officer. And what's really needed are operation-to-operation communications that are trusted communications, and that trust building is really at the core of this, because you know, the private sector utilities are deathly afraid that if they say early on, well, we think the answer to restoration is X, Y, and Z, and then it ends up being F, G, and H, that then they're going to be called to task, and that'll be communicated via the public information system. What we really need are operators talking to operators with the understanding that, you know, they're dealing in estimates. That's why it's called estimates, and that things are going to change. But that kind of relationship building takes a lot of time and a lot of very careful effort, and these exercises really are being used to kind of drive that. I think that is probably at the core of a lot of the expectation management that needs to get done.
Yeah, this is Fred Hinchmeister at NERC ESISAC. I would echo what Dennis said. I think that's right on. And I also think we can pre-predict some of those interdependency explanations that we can put into, brief awareness products for crisis communications and management of expectations to both stakeholders and individuals out in the community. And in certain regions where we can identify what a few of those are, net them down into the one paragraph explanation that's simple but helps people to understand, that's very helpful. For example, in Sandy, we had a situation where, the federal government was helping out with the military movement of petroleum products from just outside the region, maybe 4 hours away by highway. And I think folks on the other end of the media channels were saying, well, if that's happening and 8 hours has gone by, but it only takes 4 hours to get here from Pennsylvania, where they're coming from, well then, why aren't they here? They don't understand that, well, not just any petroleum goes in that tank. The tank has to be cleaned out. Not just any fitting puts that petroleum in the tank. The fitting might have to be changed, and they might have a supply chain issue. These kinds of things can be predicted by experienced operators like ourselves in good regional meetings, and we can craft crisis communications left to boom ahead of time so that we can give a little awareness and understanding to our state and local officials and our community members regionally out in the field, and that's what we need to focus on.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. I appreciate your response and your input today. And again, we're running out of time here, so I'd like to just once again thank all our panelists today for providing their time and insight. We'd just like to let everyone know that the recording of today's webinar will be made available to all the attendees after the webinar, so everyone will receive that. Also, the presentation that was given will be made available. All registrants will receive the findings of the final report after the webinar series is complete. And I'd also like to thank Sherry Black and Laura Stockstill from the Regional Catastrophic Planning Team for taking the lead on this webinar series project, and also thank Dennis Schrader from All Hazards Consortium for kicking off our webinar today. And would like to just remind the audience that on June 4th from 10 to noon we'll wrap up our webinar series with part 3, best practices and lessons learned. So we hope that you'll join us on June 4th for our final session. With that, again, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today and taking time out of their morning to join us. And I hope everyone has an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you very much.